So today, is this on? Everybody in the back row, okay? So today we'll hear from Srimad Bhagawatam, Canto 3, Chapter 10. This is divisions of the creation. And we'll hear texts 3 and 4. And some more. They have very short purports, but thank you. So we'll do 3 together. Sutta uvacha evam sanchoditas tena evam sanchoditas tena chakra kaushadavir muni chatra kaushadavir muni. Okay, pop quiz. Does this word chatra seem familiar?
Yes. I like chatra.
Okay, that's a nice guess. Anyone else? Any wild guesses? It's an address, it's a name. Whose name?
Vidura.
Who's that?
Vidura? Who is Vidura?
There you go, ding, 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 for 300. Who is Vidura for 300? Yes, we've heard Vidura addressed as Kshatriya several times over the last few chapters. Kshatriya Kaushadavir Muni Rita Pratyaha Tan Prashnan Rita Pratyaha Tan Prashnan Vridistan Atha Bhargava Vridistan Atha Bhargava Evam sanchoditas tena Chatra kaushadavir muni Rita pratyahatan prashnan Vridistan Bhargava Evam sanchoditas tena Chatra kaushadavir muni Rita pratyahatan prashnan Vridistan Bhargava. Others, please.
Sutta vacha evam sanchoditas tena Chatra kaushadavir muni Rita pratyahatan prashnan Vridistan Atha Bhargava
Evam sanchoditas tena
Evam sanchoditas tena
Chatra
Chatra kaushadavir muni
Rita pratyahatan prashnan
Rita pratyahatan prashnan
Vridistan Atha Bhargava
Synonyms. Sutta uvacha. Sri Sutta Goswami said. Evam. Thus. Sanchodita. Being enlightened. Tena. By him. Chatra. By Vidura. Kaushadavi. The son of Kushara. Muni. Great sage. Rita. Being pleased. Pratyaha. Replied. Tam. Those. Krishna.
Krishna.
Questions?
Questions.
Jai Shri Panchatattva.
Hridistan,
Krishna.
from the core of his heart.
From the core of his heart.
Atha,
Tata.
thus,
Thus.
Bhargava,
Bhagawatam.
O son of Prithu.
O son of Prithu.
Translation. Sutta Goswami said, O son of Prithu, the great sage Maitreya Muni, thus hearing from Vidura, felt very much enlightened. Everything was in his heart, and thus he began to reply to the questions one after another. Responsibly, please. Sutta Goswami said,
Sutta Goswami said,
O son of Prithu,
O son of Prithu,
the great sage Maitreya Muni,
the great sage Maitreya Muni,
thus hearing from Vidura,
thus hearing from Vidura,
felt very much enlightened.
felt very much enlightened.
Everything was in his heart,
Everything was in his heart,
and thus he began to reply
and thus he began to reply
to the questions
to the questions
one after another.
one after another.
Srila Prabhupada's purport. The phrase Sutta Uvacha, Sutta Goswami said, appears to indicate a break in the discourse between Maharaj Parikshit and Shukadeva Goswami. While Shukadeva Goswami was speaking to Maharaj Parikshit, Sutta Goswami was only one member of a large audience. But Sutta Goswami was speaking to the sages of Naimisharanya, headed by the sage Shaunaka, a descendant of Shukadeva Goswami. This, however, does not make any substantial difference in the topics under discussion. About this verse, everything was in his heart. Where did it go? Hridistan, from the core of his heart, everything was situated in his heart. Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur explains that when we say he kept it in his heart, he means he didn't forget the questions. He kept Maitreya's questions in his heart. So he was also paying very close attention. And this calls, I think, to our attention the fact that Bhakti Yoga very much is business of the heart. We engage all our senses, but all our senses must be engaged ultimately from the heart. And that's something that happens progressively. It's not something that we necessarily need to force or pretend or anything like that. As we engage in the process of Bhakti Yoga in good association under the guidance of competent devotees, then naturally everything, our focus moves to the heart and everything comes from the heart. Just like sometimes in kirtan, you won't hear the kirtan leader. I think particularly of Janani and Shita Gopi. They don't say, from your vocal cords or from your big brain, but they exhort us to chant from our heart, to go into our hearts. And sometimes you hear devotees digging deeply into their hearts when they're chanting. Sometimes I've noticed this with some of the devotees here, and it's really cool when it happens. Text 4. Maitreya Uvacha, Vidin Chopi Tata Chokre Divyam Varsha Shtatam Tapaha Atmanyatmanam Aveshya Yataha Bhagavanaja. The greatly learned sage Maitreya said, O Vidura, Brahma thus engaged himself in penances for 100 celestial years, as advised by the personality of Godhead, and applied himself in devotional service to the Lord. Srila Prabhupada's purport. That Brahma engaged himself for the personality of Godhead Narayana means that he engaged himself in the service of the Lord. That is the highest penance one can perform for any number of years. There is no retirement from such service, which is eternal and ever encouraging. How's that? Ever encouraging. give strength to our hearts. Om Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnanam Jana Shalakaya Chakshuram Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum lankayate girim Jakrapatamaham Bande Shri Gurun Dinataranam Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupakadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindho Yevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namo. Somebody's trying to tell me to keep it short. Sutta Uvacha Evam Sanchoditastena Kshatrā Kaushāla Viruni Rita Pratyahatam Prashnam Hristam Ataphargava. Sutta Goswami said, O son of Bhrigu, the great sage Maitreya Muni, thus hearing from Vidura, felt very much enlightened. Everything was in his heart, and thus he began to reply to the questions one after another. Maitreya Raja, Virincho Vitata Chakre Divyam Varsha Shatam Tava, Atmanyatmanam Avesha Yataha Bhagavanaja. The greatly learned sage Maitreya said, O Vidura, Brahma thus engaged himself in penances for 100 celestial years, as advised by the personality of Godhead, and applied himself in devotional service to the Lord. So, pardon me, please. Let's hope I can heed the warning. Keep it short. A couple things comes to mind from these verses. One is the Shittin narrators calls our attention to the different levels of nesting of the stories in the Bhagavatam. So we started out with Sutta Goswami addressing the sages of Naimisharanya, telling about how Shukadeva Goswami met with Maharaj Pariksit after Maharaj Pariksit had given up his kingdom and sat down to completely fast to death, and then posed the essential question, Kusha. That's your quick.
What is the duty of one who's about to die?
It's the duty of someone who's about to die. In other words, what's the most important thing for us to focus on? And then, along the way, Shukadeva Goswami tells a story about somebody else who did something that exemplifies something that he's teaching, and sometimes within, I think it goes 5, 6 layers deep sometimes. It's pretty interesting. I haven't actually set aside time to kind of trace this out, but it's something it's on my list.
Everybody's done it. There's a
Someone's
nice
done.
There's a nice shirt.
Okay, so I don't have to reinvent the wheel. Although it's good for me to go through the exercise, cements it. Just like when Chantakopi Gita with the other devotees, we take turns. They took over after was it the 3rd day, 4th day that we were chanting together. They just I noticed that a couple of them were chanting along with me, because I thought, yeah, I'll do the Sanskrit, you guys can read the translations. And then I heard them chanting with me, and I said, it's not going to happen like this. We're all going to get a chance, so it's really nice. But I'm also chanting underneath my breath along with them and reading the verse with them. So, because it's good work from my heart. So there's that. And then there's Maitreya is being enlivened by Vidura's questions. This is an important element of any discourse on the Bhagavat, or on Bhagavan, any Hari Katha, any Krishna Katha. There are 2 elements. There's a speaker and the audience. And at least half the work is done by the good hearts and the attention of the audience. And here we have the best audience. We've got King Parikshit, who's got nothing else to do in his life. He's focused like a laser on what he needs to do to complete the mission of human life perfectly. And so he's got no other business. He's not interested even in drinking water for the next 7 days. He's there with Shukadev, and he's got questions, and Shukadev, he knows Shukadev's got some answers, power-packed answers, and then he comes back with more questions. And along the way, in all the different levels of the nested narratives, there are always questions and answers. And this is, Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita, this is how we approach the Guru. Tadviti pariprashnena, tadviti pariprashnena, tadviti pariprashnena, pranipatena, tadvishni pranipatena, pariprashnena sevaya. So three things, three elements. Pranipat, submission, pariprashna, good questions, and seva. Chanakya Pandit tells us that just as we get just as we get water from a well by digging, we get knowledge from the Guru by our service. So these three elements are there, and we see that here at every turn in Srimad Bhagavatam. We see it in Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna's got questions all along the way. We're just trying to clarify this one thing. But what about this doubt? But so many things, always questions and answers. So it's a really an important part of the equation that the audience be qualified. Just as we see at the very beginning of the Bhagavatam, we see there's a qualification for the best audience, the most suitable audience for the Bhagavatam, because it's a particular subject matter. And not everybody's going to be terribly interested in this subject matter. Some people are more interested in, is it still World Series? Some people are more interested in who's ahead in the World Series. I don't remember who it is. I think I saw a headline somewhere along the way, but other people are more interested in all the discourse, all the different kinds of discourse around the coronavirus pandemic and the vaccinations. And other people are interested in the 2020 election. It's 2 years ago, or that's a year ago, man. What's the deal? We're interested in so many things, but not very many people are going to be really interested in this. So just as Krishna tells us at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, he tells Arjuna, and through Arjuna us, at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, your whole business is really just about me. You should be all about me. And then he says just exactly, practically what that means. It means setting everything else aside. Sarva dharma parityaja, completely rejecting any conventional conceptions of dharma, even of dharma, of duty, what it means to do what's right. And I'm going to do it again in a minute. And then following that, kind of a philosophical sequel to the Bhagavad Gita, at the very beginning of the Bhagavatam, in the second verse, we hear Dharma Prochita Kaitavotra Paramoniya Nirmat Saranam Satam. This is for a particular audience. This is for people who have already done that. Dharma Prabhujita, Dharma Prabhujita Kaitava, right? Giving up all kinds of cheating religions, any kind of conventional conception of what Dharma means. Those who've already done that, Prabhujita, same thing as Parityaja, completely reject. Not just give it up, not just pay too much attention to it, worry about it too much, but completely turn your back on it. Got nothing to do with it. For those people whose hearts have become purified by hearing these things, and therefore they're completely free of envy, that's the best audience. So that's we want to kind of create those kinds of atmospheres. That kind of audience inspires the speaker to say something useful. So I've said often, and I've had friends also acknowledge the audience's part. Good audience really inspires the speaker. I'm a really introverted, shy people, but I'm not generally very good at just speaking to four walls. It feels really awkward to me. So it's nice to have a good audience, to feel the good hearts of all the devotees engaged in the discussion. So, and Prabhupada points out in the first purport, first of today's purports, that whichever level of this narrative we're at, doesn't matter, it's all going to be the same thing. It's all going to be just Ulap Jam juice. Ulap Jam juice all the way. Oh, and then there's no retirement from such service. And even, we've got a couple of people around here who are, a couple of us, I guess we can admit we're pushing 30. It's not even funny anymore, is it? But still, you go in the kitchen, today Nagapatni, I'm cooking the lunch. Actually, on the days that Nagapatni comes in, I'm her assistant, pretty much, and I fill in the spots because she's just a powerhouse, and she's got so many ideas, and I'm just how big do I cut these, and how many chilies should I get for the whatever. But then yesterday, when we didn't expect Nagapatni to be in, she's in there all afternoon with the Lord's morning sweets. And she's giving classes back there during the week. And at Kushma, if we started talking about all the things that Kushma was there, I would get into big trouble with time, with the clock. And even me, I have sinks to scrub and towels to wash and fold and things like that, lawns to mow. Now that they've chipped all those branches, I guess it's time for me to mow the lawn again. She didn't even say, no, you're too old. She said, yes, go for it. And that's what it all comes down to. Brahma's engaging in this 100 celestial years of meditation, and what it boils down to is he's going to buckle down and get to work with his devotional service. So I thought we could take a quick tour through a particular chapter in the Uddhava Gita. I like to share this chapter sometimes. I might have done it before. This is chapter 14, titled Lord Krishna Explains the Yoga System to Sri Uddhava. So a couple of these I'll stop and read the Sanskrit just because they're kind of prominent verses. Sri Uddhava said, my dear Krishna, the learned questions, right? The learned sages who explain the Vedic literature recommend various processes for perfecting one's life. And I thought of this chapter because all throughout the Bhagavad Gita, and especially all throughout the Bhagavatam, beginning in the first canto, you see this in the 5th chapter of the first canto when Narada Muni is instructing Vyasadeva, who's completely depressed because after all the wonderful service he's done, he still feels unsatisfied.
Jai Shri Panchatattva ki.
So Narada Muni finds him depressed like this and begins to instruct him. Yeah, there is something you missed. Just one small detail. All this other stuff is nice for all kinds of different people at different levels of understanding, realization, material and spiritual progress. There's something for just about everybody so far. But what you've missed is something for the bhaktas. What you've missed is something that exclusively glorifies devotional service to Lord Krishna's lotus feet. So and along the way, as I often point out in verses 17 and 19 of that 5th chapter, Narada Muni draws a very stark contrast between every other process and bhakti yoga. In broad strokes, everything else has to be done perfectly to get any results, and there's got to be a little bit of bhakti added. But even if you completely blow it when you're practicing bhakti, there's no loss. Even if we're full of faults, even not just we make mistakes, but old habits come up to the surface and we do really nasty things. Still, you just keep going. Maybe there's a bump here, maybe there's a little hiatus there, but bhakti can't be impeded by anything because it's not caused by anything else. It comes, bhakti, bhaktya sanjataya bhaktya, Bhagavatam says. Bhakti comes from bhakti. We get bhakti from the association of bhaktas. So he says, considering these varieties of viewpoint, my Lord, please tell me whether all these processes are equally important or whether one of them is supreme. Talk about your loaded question. My dear Lord, you clearly explained the process of unalloyed devotional service by which a devotee removes all material association from his life, enabling him to fix his mind on you. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, by the influence of time, the transcendental sound of Vedic knowledge was lost at the time of annihilation. Therefore, when the subsequent creation took place, I spoke the Vedic knowledge to Brahma because I myself am the religious principles enunciated in the Vedas. And we know this because we've heard a couple times over the last year or so, Krishna instructing Brahma. Second canto, again now in the third. Lord Brahma spoke this Vedic knowledge to his eldest son Manu and the 7 great sages headed by Bhrigu Muni, and then accepted the same knowledge from Manu. Also, Shaunaka Rishi was descended from Shukadeva Goswami. How? Disciplic succession. He heard. He's a follower of Shukadeva Goswami, not a son, not a seminal son. From the forefathers headed by Bhrigu Muni and other sons of Brahma, that was a point in Prabhupada's first purport that I didn't address. From the forefathers headed by Bhrigu Muni and other sons of Brahma appeared many children and descendants who assumed different forms as demigods, demons, human beings, Guhyakas, Siddhas, Gandharvas, Vidyadharas, Charanas, Kindevas, Kinnaras, Nagas, Kimpurushas, and so on. All of the many universal species, along with their respective leaders, appeared with different natures and desires generated from the 3 modes of material nature. Therefore, because of different characteristics of living entities within the universe, there are a great many Vedic rituals, mantras, and rewards. Thus, due to the great variety of desires and natures among human beings, there are many different theistic philosophies of life which are handed down through tradition, custom, and disciplic succession. There are other teachers who directly support atheistic viewpoints. So we even have stuff for the atheists, right? Especially if we read it in particular ways. Oh, best among men, the intelligence of human beings is bewildered by my illusory potency, and thus, according to their own activities and whims, they speak in innumerable ways about what is actually good for people. Some say that people will be happy by performing pious religious activities. Others say that happiness is attained through fame, sense gratification, truthfulness, self-control, peace, self-interest, political influence, opulence, renunciation, consumption, big theme in our culture nowadays, sacrifice, penancy, charity, vows, regulated duties, or strict disciplinary regulation. Each process has its proponents. All the persons I've just mentioned obtain temporary fruits from their material work. Indeed, the meager and miserable situations they achieve bring future unhappiness and are based on ignorance. Even while enjoying the fruits of their work, such persons are filled with lamentation. O learned Uddhava, those who fix their consciousness on me, giving up all material desires, share with me a happiness that cannot possibly be experienced by those engaged in sense gratification. One who does not desire anything within this world, who has achieved peace by controlling his senses, whose consciousness is equal in all conditions, and whose mind is completely satisfied in me, finds only happiness wherever he goes. One who has fixed his consciousness on me desires neither the position or abode of Lord Brahma or Lord Indra, nor an empire on the earth, nor sovereignty in the lower planetary systems, nor the eightfold perfection of yoga, nor liberation from birth and death. Such a person desires me alone. No. This is the verse I have highlighted. Natata na priyatmana, natata me priyatama, atma yonir nashamtaha, nacha sankarshano nashrir, nayatma cha yatavava. It's really nice. My dear Uddhava, neither Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, Sankarshan, the goddess of fortune, nor indeed even my own self is as dear to me as you are. With the dust of my devotees' lotus feet, I desire to purify the material worlds which are situated within me. I always follow the footsteps of my pure devotees, who are free from all personal desire, wrapped in the thought of my pastimes, peaceful, without any feelings of enmity, and with equal disposition everywhere. Those who are out without any desire, where's the yoga part? Those who are without any desire for personal gratification, whose minds are always attached to me, who are peaceful, without false ego, and merciful to all living entities, and whose consciousness is never affected by opportunities for sense gratification, such persons enjoy in me a happiness that cannot be known or achieved by those lacking such detachment from the material world. Oh, this is an interesting verse. This came up in the talks I was giving recently on the depth and extent of powers, of bhakti's power. This is a verse that we see used, that in the Bhakti Sandarbha Jiva Goswami uses to support his assertion that even sadhana bhakti has at least some power to control Krishna. So he says, and here we see the contrast drawn again. Bhadyamanopi mad bhakto vishaya ajitendriya praya pragal bhaya bhaktya vishaya navibhuyate. Dear my dear Uddhava, this is a different one. This shows that even those, it's addressing sadhana bhakti, Jiva says, and Vishwanath Chakravarti concurs, because it's addressing those devotees who haven't completely conquered their senses. So it can't be prema bhakti or even bhava bhakti. It can't be sadhya bhakti. We're still talking about sadhana bhakti. So this is a powerful verse, the way it's used by our acharyas. My dear Uddhava, even if my devotee is not fully conquered his senses, he may be harassed by material desires, but because of his unflinching devotion for me, he will not be defeated by sense gratification. And in discussing this verse in the Bhagavatam, in his discussion of this verse in the Bhagavatam, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur cites the 30th verse of the Bhagavad Gita's 9th chapter, Apichet Suduracha Bhajate Mam, which makes the same point. If someone's real goal, their actual goal is to serve me, but they still can't pull it together, even if they do awful things, they're not to be disparaged. You're not to gossip about their faults, their mistakes. And he tells Arjuna, not only that, when there is such gossip, I want you to stand up, I want you to raise your hand and say, devotees are never vanquished, devotees are never conquered by these things. There may be a little glitch here and there, but they will never be overcome by these desires. Because they're not going to believe me. I say so many things and then I go back. But if you say it, then people will believe you. Of course, then it's on us, practicing devotees, to make Krishna's words believable by our character and our behavior. My dear Uddhava, just as a blatant, and then he also cites this whole section that Jiva Goswami talks about in the Bhakti Sandarbha. My dear Uddhava, just as a blazing fire turns firewood into ashes, similarly devotion to me completely burns to ashes any sins committed by my devotees. Oh, and this is the verse where the contrast is drawn. It's very strong. Na sadhayati mam yogo, Na sankyam dharma uttava, na svadhyayasta pastyago yatapati mamorjita. My dear Uddhava, the unalloyed devotional service rendered by me, to me by my devotees brings me under their control. Brings me under their control. Strong words. I cannot thus be controlled by those engaged in mystic yoga, Sankhya philosophy, pious work, Vedic study, austerity, or renunciation. These things don't impress me. But if someone worships me exclusively, I belong to them. We see this in Chaitanya Charitamrita, where Advaita Acharya is calling the Lord, and he's relying on a verse that says, if you worship the Lord just with some tulsi leaves and manjaris and some pure water, then the Lord becomes purchased by that devotee. So he's counting on that. He's hunkar, he's bellowing, he's calling the Lord, okay, now it's time. You get down here now. Things are bad, come now. And Krishna says, okay, I'm clever, I can accomplish a couple of purposes along the way. So he appears as Lord Chaitanya. Where's the yogi? Only by practicing unalloyed devotional service with faith in me can one obtain me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I am naturally dear to my devotees who take me as the only goal of their loving service. By engaging in such pure devotional service, even the dog-eaters can purify themselves from the contamination of their low birth. Neither religious activities endowed with honesty and mercy, nor knowledge obtained with great penance can completely purify one's consciousness if they're bereft of loving service to me. I completely underestimated the time. And so I'm just going to summarize what's to come. He defined, when he eventually gets to it, I forgot to check and remind myself how many verses this was, but Krishna tells Uddhava that it gives him this whole process of sitting in meditation and contemplating the form of the Lord. And then he tells him, and he gives this really elaborate description of this form, kind of Narayan form, and how to meditate on the different, like the ankle bells on his feet, and the necklaces around his neck. And then he says, then focus all your attention on my face. Meditate on my smiling face. And then he says, then divert your attention to space. And then he says, forget the whole thing and just take shelter of me. So we come at the end of that chapter to where we began devotional service, and to where we come at the end of the Bhagavad Gita as well. Just all this other stuff, forget it, set it aside, completely reject it, and just take shelter of me alone. I'm sorry that I got carried away earlier and didn't get a chance to share the whole check. I think this has happened before. I'll stop here for any questions or comments. Radhesham.
First of all, my apologies for blurting out that there's a chart of the levels of speakers in Bhagavatam. I should have saved it for after. But on that topic, do you have any thoughts?
I'm still going to do my homework, though.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I was thinking of doing the same, sort of as I read, sort of chart it out, because it is nice to follow that flow. But do you have any thoughts as to why there's particular mention in the purport of the third verse that it's not indicating a break in we've already heard from Sutta Goswami and Shankara several times. Why now is Prabhupada bringing that up?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and I didn't come up with anything that felt satisfying.
And it's not in the Acharya's commentaries at all.
No. Well, I readily I have only available only Vishwanath's. I have, I think, for the 10th canto I have some. I know I have for the Rasa Panchadhyaya, I have a whole bunch because I edited a book for Touchstone, I think, on the Rasa Panchadhyaya, and includes lots of purports, including Acharyas that we haven't heard of much. But yeah, just Vishwanath, and he doesn't address that. I found the most striking thing that he said was that kept in his heart, and he said he kept Vidura's questions in his heart. So he was, he was contemplating those questions, and he was going to answer all of them one after another.
Prita Pratya, it's loving question.
Yeah. These are all exchanges of affection. These are all part of pretilokshan. Revealing your heart and inquiring confidentially and sharing our hearts with each other. Of course, we need to be careful who we share our hearts with. That's why it's called confidence. People we know we can trust with our hearts. We know we can trust Krishna. I was just listening recently to a talk that Radhika Raman gave, probably at Silicon Valley, Iskcon Silicon Valley. And I just lost my train of thought.
Who we can confide in.
Oh, yeah, that whenever some challenge is posed in our life, we may wonder, is this my mind? Is this my karma? Is this Maya? Is this that nasty person who said that thing about me? What is this? And we should understand that eventually we come to understand that these are all Krishna's things. And sometimes he said that when we go into a situation blind, he said, Krishna can tell us, okay, I'm going to pose this challenge at this particular time, and it's going to last this long, and you'll come out okay. We'll say, oh, okay, sure, bring it, But he springs them on us, and we come into them blind. And he says when you get into a situation like that blind, then all you have to trust is whoever's there. And that's always Krishna. Just like with the Pandavas, Kunti and the Pandavas. Kunti's not essentially asking for more calamities. She's asking for more calamities because whenever the calamities happened, it was easy to think of Krishna because he was always right there. He was always there to help them out. And now he's going back to Dwarka, leaving us in the Stinapur. Now that we're in the catbird seat and everything. What good is that? Now there's no Krishna. We don't have Krishna to hang out with us every day. So bring the calamities back if that's what it means to always have Krishna with us. So yeah, I like that. I like that point that he made because we go into it blind. We learn to trust, just like I mentioned that trust fall in those team building exercises that we would do at the beginning. I think it was not every semester. I think it was just the beginning of the new school year at Hawaii Community College. Is that okay?
Wonderful.
I think it's the start of it.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, then we can move on to the next process of devotional service. Thank you so much for your attention. Grantaraj, Srimad Bhagavatam, Vijay. Navadwip, Bhakti